The snow had stopped falling 3 days ago, but the cold hadn't lifted. Smoke still curled from the lodge tops, lazy and low, pressed flat by a sky that refused to open. The sun never fully rose that week, it only glowed behind the clouds like a hidden wound. The elders said that meant something was coming. The dogs barked at nothing. The children kept closer to the fires, and the scouts didn't sing when they returned. The last scout came in before dawn, breath sharp and shallow. His leggings were torn, one cheek scraped raw from a fall. He dropped to one knee before the chief and whispered just loud enough for those nearby to hear. "Smoke, East Ridge, at least 10 fires, not ours." No one moved at first. Then the whispers began. Warriors from the northern band. The ones who painted their arrows with snake venom. The ones who raided in silence, whose arrows fell before footsteps were heard. The ones who never left a trail, only bodies frozen with eyes still open. The chief stood and gave the order with no ceremony. Break camp by sundown. No one argued. They had moved before many times, but never this fast, never with this kind of dread. Women began packing hides and grinding stones. Hunters dismantled drying racks and buried coals. The old ones murmured prayers as they pulled medicine bundles from their shelters. Even the dogs, as if sensing urgency, lay quiet. But one man did not pack. He didn't move toward the lodge. He moved toward the rocks. They called him Ghost Elk, though no one could say when the name had started. He spoke little, lived on the edge of every camp, built his own fire apart from the others. He was neither warrior nor elder, yet no one told him what to do. He had once been part of a larger band, that much they knew. But his village had burned during a night raid seasons ago. He was the only one who walked away. Since then, he carved. Everywhere he went, he carved strange grooves into stone and antler. He covered his shelter with overlapping hides that blended with earth. He cooked with steam but no smoke. Children sometimes crept close to watch him work, but even they grew uneasy when he stared too long into nothing. That morning, while others packed, he stood facing a pile of boulders and began to build. No one stopped him. Some watched. Others muttered, "Foolish. There's no hiding from those men." But Ghost Elk didn't answer. He laid hides over stone, tucked them under with frozen hands, arranged snow across the seams until it looked like a hill that had always been there. Then he disappeared inside it. By the time the sun fell, the rest of the camp had begun its journey south over the frozen river and beyond the sheltering trees. Only Ghost Elk remained, waiting. He wasn't born with that name. Once, in another valley, beneath different stars and different cedar trees, he had been called Tayen, New Moon. A quiet child, yes, but not strange. He had laughed, loved, hunted like the others. He had a brother who carved arrows so smooth they hummed in the air, and a mother who could trace a deer's steps through mud like they were written words. That life ended in fire. One night, the drums stopped, the dogs didn't bark, and the wind carried too much silence. By the time the first scream cut the dark, it was too late. Raiders swept in, not many, but enough. Arrows from black bows. Fire poured into lodges like spilled blood. Tayen ran. Not because he was a coward, but because his mother pushed him out the back of the lodge before the roof fell. He hid beneath the roots of a frozen tree and listened as his family was erased. The next morning he walked until his legs gave out. A wandering band found him, fed him, gave him shelter but never truly knew him. Something in him had broken, or maybe something else had opened. A listening, a seeing, that others didn't understand. He stopped answering to Tayen. He spoke only when needed. Ate, little, slept lightly, watched the wind more than people. One day, a girl whispered, "He walks like an elk ghost." The name stuck, Ghost Elk. At first it was mockery, later, mystery. And now, reverence, with a touch of fear. He saw things others missed, how smoke moved different after snow, how sound bounced off stone and told stories. How even breath left marks if you weren't careful. He began shaping shelters that weren't seen until you stepped on them. Cooking fires that smelled like earth instead of meat. Trails that led in circles until even dogs gave up. People called it magic. He called it removal. "Enemies don't find what's not trying to be seen," he once told a boy gathering firewood. When that same boy disappeared during a raid and was found 2 days later, safe, untracked, curled in a hollow beneath fur-covered stones that smelled of ash and pine, the elders stopped questioning Ghost Elk's strange ways. They left him alone. But now, with death once again moving through the trees, he had no intention of running. Not because he wanted to fight, because he wanted to finish. He believed a camp could disappear not by running, but by understanding what eyes truly look for. He had studied the ways warriors track prey. They didn't follow people, they followed patterns. He would break the pattern and build something impossible, a place that could breathe, eat, sleep, and stay without being seen. As the others marched south, Ghost Elk crouched in his growing shelter, sealing the final flap with snow and fur. Outside, the wind howled. Inside, not a breath escaped. He had watched them for years, the enemies who moved like shadows. They did not shout when they raided. They didn't ride in with banners or drums. They didn't wear colors. They wore the land. And they followed not men, but signs of men. Ghost Elk had seen it himself long ago. From a distant ridge he had once watched a band of warriors crouched at the edge of a frozen creek, studying not prints but a trail of snow that had melted wrong. A sleeping fire beneath the surface had warped the snow from below, leaving a ghost ring in the powder. They followed it like wolves. 2 lodges fell that night. Another time, he saw them track a camp by the angle of shadows. A hunting group had moved across a flat field too late in the morning. The sun was high. Their shadows stretched behind them long and straight. The enemy arrived 3 hours later, stood where the hunters had walked, and measured the angle of those shadows against the sun's path. Then they followed it. Ghost Elk never forgot that. From then on, he studied what eyes hunted for. Not sound, because fear makes people quiet. Not scent, because wind lies. But smoke, heat, shape, repetition. They looked for the color of a campfire against the trees, the sound of dogs barking at odd hours, the outline of a man's back against a lodge flap, the glint of stone when the sun hits a knife left out by mistake. He called them tells. And now he would erase every single one. Inside his stone-covered shelter, he built the fire not in a pit but in a trench. He dug it deep, angled it, let the heat tunnel sideways under rock. He fed it only pine needles and bark woods that burned hot and fast but left no long-lasting scent. Over the trench, he laid wet reeds and moss. When the smoke rose, it moved not upward but sideways, filtered and flat, crawling just above the snow like mist. No one would smell meat. He packed dried roots into the broth, boiled water over stones. He drank warmth, not flavor. Even his breath, he learned to trap. He slept with hides over his mouth, exhaling through his palms so the vapor wouldn't escape in clouds. He sewed leather flaps along the cracks of the shelter, where the wind might carry sound or light. He lined them with ash to mask the warmth, and then he waited. The snow returned on the second day. Good. Cover. On the third night he heard them. Movement on the ridge, a bird call that stopped too soon, the crunch of snow, then silence. They were watching, looking, sniffing the air for smoke that told stories. But Ghost Elk's fire didn't talk. It listened. It looked like nothing from a distance. Just a cluster of rocks where the snow had drifted deep, like wind had simply folded the land there over time. No light escaped, no sound hummed. Not even the breath of fire whispered from beneath it. Ghost Elk had spent the last 3 winters building versions of it, small, hidden shelters meant not for comfort, but for vanishing. This one was different. This one wasn't meant for him alone. This one was a lesson carved in earth and hide, a declaration whispered to the wind. I can remain without being seen. He had chosen the site carefully, a shallow depression near the base of 2 leaning boulders. From above, it looked like nothing more than a hollow between stones. He dug into the soil, not down, but at an angle like a fox den, curling into the earth with curves instead of corners. Corners, he'd learned, cast unnatural shadows. Predators notice corners. But curves? Curves belong to the land. He covered the walls in packed mud and layers of thick grass mats that soaked in sound. Above it, he laid thin branches, stacked stone slabs, and then wrapped everything in rawhide stitched with sinew. On top of that, snow, dirt, fallen leaves, anything that would break shape and scatter pattern. The entrance was no door, just a slit beneath a lip of stone, low enough to force a crawl. He designed it so that cold air sank into a separate chamber before it could reach the fire trench. This kept the warmth trapped inside, and more importantly, it kept the outside air from carrying the scent of life outward. Inside, the chamber was barely tall enough to sit in. He laid furs along the curved wall, not for comfort, but to muffle the sounds of movement. Every breath, every stir, was swallowed in the layered skins. The fire trench, angled beneath the stone slope, pulled air from a lower tunnel like a creature breathing through two nostrils. It burned clean thin strips of birch and bark coals. No meat, no fat, nothing that clung to memory. He boiled water with herbs that smelled like pine and wet dirt, nothing inviting, nothing warm. Only the scent of a forgotten corner of the forest, the kind of place hunters walk past because it says nothing to the senses. To test it, Ghost Elk crawled out just before dusk, moved 100 paces upwind, and crouched low to watch. The shelter was gone. His shelter. Even knowing where it was, his eyes slipped over it. The angles had vanished. The hides had matched the snow. The breathing hole steamed gently beneath a pile of leaves that never moved. He smiled, not out of pride, but relief. It was ready. When darkness fell, he crawled back in and sealed the flap with a layer of frozen moss. Inside, he listened to his own heartbeat. Outside, the wind picked up, and with it, the footsteps of something coming. Warriors, scouts, spirits, it didn't matter, they wouldn't see him, because the land had swallowed him whole. Before the camp moved south, they laughed at him. Not cruelly at first, more like how men chuckle at old stories or foolish games. "He thinks he can make himself disappear," one said while folding hides. "Better he learns how to run faster," another replied. Even the elders, usually silent in their judgment, exchanged glances that said more than words ever could. It wasn't the first time Ghost Elk had defied the path chosen by the chief, but this time felt more dangerous. This time, death wasn't just possible, it was probable. Everyone knew the enemy didn't leave survivors. If Ghost Elk stayed behind, he wouldn't be telling any more stories. The night before departure, a few curious ones approached his shelter. They stood at a distance, unsure whether to laugh or to marvel. There was no door to knock on, no clear entrance. Just a strange bulge beneath the snow, like a frost-covered animal sleeping beneath the hill. Someone tossed a pebble toward it. It rolled down and disappeared into the folds of white. No movement came from within. One man muttered, "Maybe he's already frozen in there." Another whispered, "Maybe that's the trick." By morning, the camp had packed and moved out. Women carried infants wrapped in fox fur. Warriors hauled weapons over their shoulders, eyes scanning every ridge and hollow. The children didn't laugh, they had seen too many faces go quiet after raids. As they disappeared into the tree line, a final scout stayed behind, tasked with watching for any signs of movement from the east. 2 days passed. Then, on the third morning, the scout came running. His words spilled out with the urgency of one who has seen something he doesn't yet understand. "They came," he panted. 10 riders, maybe more. They circled the ridge, looked for tracks. I watched them pass within a stone's throw of where he was. Everyone leaned in, and they kept riding. Whispers spread like fire over dry leaves. "They didn't see him? They didn't stop? Not even the dogs?" The scout shook his head. "Nothing. They moved slow, scanning everything. I thought they'd smell the fire, or see his lodge, but they didn't even pause. One of them spat in the snow and said, 'No one's been here for days.' And then they left. The laughter stopped. That evening, around the fire, the conversation turned, no longer mocking, now full of questions. How had he done it? Was it a cave? Magic? Did the spirits cover his scent? Even the chief, silent and watchful, finally spoke. He knew something we didn't. That much is clear. A young boy tugged at his mother's sleeve and whispered, "Does that mean Ghost Elk is stronger than the warriors?" His mother smiled faintly. "No," she said. "It means he sees what others never bother to." Back on the ridge, inside a lodge of stone and silence, Ghost Elk sat motionless, eyes half closed, listening not to the enemy, but to the stillness that followed them. He didn't celebrate. He didn't boast. He simply adjusted a flap of hide near the vent, letting the air move in a new way. Because he knew they would return. And next time, they might not be fooled by shadows alone. Snow remembers. More than wind, more than soil, more than even the footprints themselves. It holds the weight of what passed through it, how heavy the body, how hurried the steps, whether the traveler was calm or afraid. Snow tells stories, and Ghost Elk knew this better than anyone. To erase scent was one thing, to quiet smoke was another, but if the snow betrayed him, even the best shelter would fail. So he began his final work, not in the lodge, but on the land itself. Each morning, just before dawn, he crawled from his stone-covered den and studied the snow like a tracker, but in reverse. He wasn't looking for where animals had gone. He was looking for how he might move without leaving anything behind. He experimented. One day, he walked backward from the vent opening to a line of trees, dragging a branch behind him to mimic a fallen limb. Another day, he walked in a spiral, placing flat stones beneath each step so the snow compressed without revealing heel or toe. Then he waited, watched the wind fill the hollows, observed how long it took for his path to vanish. He learned to step where shadows fell thickest near rocks, under branches, beside old tracks left by elk or fox. When he gathered wood, he didn't carry logs. He carried embers wrapped in moss, stones still warm from the fire, which he buried just beneath the snow where they'd radiate enough heat to warm the lodge without smoke. At night, he heated multiple rocks and placed them in shallow pits around the shelter, creating faint heat signatures that drifted in every direction. If the enemy came with dogs or scouts trained to sense warmth, they would find too many signals, too scattered, too faint, too meaningless. He trained the dogs too. Long before this winter, Ghost Elk had befriended the camp's outcast hound, a nervous, silent creature who hated fire and loved cold. While others kicked it away, he fed it with flat palms, never speaking, never commanding. Now, that dog slept near his vent, not to guard, to distract. Its scent masked his. Its prints led nowhere. If a scout found tracks, they would find only a mutt circling a stone heap, barking once, then running off toward the woods. It had worked before. It would work again. He made dummy shelters, 2 small mounds of snow covered with hide, shaped like sleeping hunters. From afar, they looked real. Too real. He scattered them in a crescent away from his den. If the enemy came, they'd waste time inspecting shadows that weren't alive. Delay, confusion, hesitation. These were his weapons. The land, now, didn't tell his story. It told a dozen wrong ones, and that was enough. When the wind howled through the valley that night, Ghost Elk didn't stir. He lay beneath the earth, beneath the hide, beneath the layer of listening snow, breathing so shallow even the frost forgot he was there. She arrived without sound, no footsteps, no dog, no signal. Just there, at the edge of the stone-covered den, hunched beneath a cowl of reed mat and feathers, eyes like river stones, clouded and still. Ghost Elk had been inside, breathing in rhythm with the heat of a stone cupped between his palms, when he felt the air shift not colder, not warmer, but thicker, like the space just before a drumbeat. He opened the flap slowly, and there she was, staring at him as if she'd been waiting for him longer than he'd been alive. They called her the Wind Listener. No one knew her age, though some swore she was older than the war trails themselves. She lived alone, far beyond the cedar line, in a hollow the sun rarely touched. Children feared her. Warriors avoided her. But elders spoke her name with caution and memory. She had warned of floods before the river rose, had sung to the fire before lightning struck the western ridgeline, had whispered "move" before a bear mauled the hunting lodge 2 winters ago. She came only when she had to, and only when the spirits themselves had run out of time. Ghost Elk said nothing. He moved aside, gestured with his hand, and she crawled in like a gust sliding under a door. Once inside, she sat cross-legged, her hands folded beneath the folds of her cloak. She did not look at him. She looked at the stones around the trench, the way the light curved and didn't flicker, the way the smoke moved without rising. "You are doing what they forgot," she said finally, her voice like wet branches breaking. "Listening to things that do not speak." Ghost Elk nodded once. "The ridge behind you," she continued. "It trembles." He frowned. "They are gathering there now," she said. "Tonight. Not tomorrow. Not in 2 days. Tonight. 10, maybe 12. Not warriors. Hunters. Trained to find what hides. Sent because they failed before." Ghost Elk's breath slowed. "They do not ride with noise. They come with snow in their mouths. They bring dogs that smell warmth. Eyes that track breath in the dark. And they have something else." He waited. "A boy. One who once lived here. One who knows your ways." Ghost Elk closed his eyes. Of course, there was always someone who turned. Someone who remembered the way a stone lodge bends in snow. Someone who once sat beside him, learning how to make smoke disappear, only to offer it now to those who seek blood. "They are already walking," the wind listener said. "You have hours, no more." He looked at her. "Why warn me?" She looked back, her face unreadable. "Because even shadows need a witness." She reached into her cloak, pulled out a bundle wrapped in wolfskin, and laid it in his lap. Inside, 3 bone slivers, carved with markings he didn't recognize, old signs, older than even the valley. One was warm to the touch, the second was cold. The third hummed faintly, like it wanted to vanish. "They cannot see what has no edge," she whispered. "Shape nothing. Become the space between their thoughts." Then she crawled back into the night, her form swallowed by snow and silence. Ghost Elk didn't follow. He simply closed the flap and began rearranging the stones. They came when the moon had not yet risen, when the clouds hung heavy with more snow but refused to weep. The world was caught in the hush that comes before a death still, but not calm, tense, waiting. Ghost Elk had sealed the flap of his den with frozen moss and a pelt soaked in soot and river mud, the kind that dulled scent and smothered warmth. The trench fire had already gone out, replaced by stones heated earlier and buried in the walls, radiating a faint, even breath. The lodge was no longer a shelter. It was a stone with a hollow heart. Outside, boots moved with discipline, not stomping but gliding, pressing the snow without shaping it. 12 men, just as the wind listener warned. One of them carried a dog, a lean, scarred thing that whined low with each step, not out of fear, but confusion. It smelled something, but couldn't find it. Its nose twitched toward the east, then the west. It circled once, then twice, as if the trail spun around itself. One of the men muttered something in a clipped tongue. The boy, the one who had once trained near Ghost Elk, pointed toward the rocks. "He sleeps beneath that rise," the boy said. "I remember his way, always buried near the stone, never under trees. He thinks wind speaks louder than fire." The leader nodded. 2 warriors approached the mound. One of them ran his hand along, the edge, frowning. "Just snow." "No," the boy said. "Feel again." They crouched, closer now, breath visible, eyes narrowed. The dog scratched at the base of the slope once, then yelped. Not a bark, a yelp, startled, as if something beneath the snow had reached up with silence and grabbed its senses, then nothing. One of the warriors stood and shook his head. "He's gone. Probably knew we'd come." Doubled back. The boy hesitated. "He wouldn't run." The leader stepped forward, scanned the space, and said, "Then he died like a coward in a hole." Either way, the ridge is empty. They moved on. Ghost Elk did not exhale until long after their steps had vanished into the trees. He lay flat, his arms at his sides, eyes open in the dark, heart slowed to the rhythm of stone. He had become the thing he once feared, a stillness mistaken for absence. The boy's voice had struck him familiar, sharp, but empty now. The words no longer held memory, only betrayal. Still he felt no hate, only a kind of tired clarity. Those who forget the lessons of the land often teach them again with their failures. He rose slowly, unsealing the vent by half an inch to feel the air. It was cold, not angry. He smiled. They had walked across him like he was snow. They had stood over him like he was stone. And they had left not knowing that the man they feared had already disappeared days ago. Not into the forest, not into the hills, but into everything they didn't know how to see. They returned to their camp on the other side of the valley with shoulders stiff and silence thick in their mouths. The wind followed them like a witness, carrying none of the triumph they expected. When the elders of their war party asked what they'd found, the boy who had once trained with ghost elk could only shake his head. "He wasn't there," he said. "But I felt him." The leader frowned and asked how that was possible. The dog reacted. The stones were warm. But there was no scent, no heat, no breath. It was like something had already been there, and then walked backward into the mountain. At first, the elders mocked him. "You lost a ghost," one said with a snort. "Did the snow eat your eyes?" But then the others, the ones who had walked in formation, sniffed the air, checked the rise, began to speak. Quietly at first, then with more weight. One said he saw footprints leading nowhere. Another said he heard faint breathing, but it came from above, not below. The dog's handler refused to speak for an hour, then admitted that the animal had bitten him not in panic but confusion. One warrior, older than the rest, pulled aside the lead scout after nightfall and said something that made the younger man go pale. "Do you know what the old ones used to say?" he asked. "They said a true windwalker could bend the air around his thoughts. Not just hide, but rewrite what others saw. Make you believe nothing was ever there. Not by trick, by truth. Because the land itself agreed to protect him." The next morning, 2 scouts were sent back not to kill, but to understand. They returned days later with nothing. No tracks, no heat, no footprints. But they carried a strange piece of carved wood, a bone shard, etched with symbols they didn't recognize, left sitting upright in a ring of untouched snow. The boy who had once known ghost elk stared at the carving for a long time. He wouldn't touch it. He only whispered, "That's his way. He leaves you something that says, 'I saw you, and you saw nothing.'" Word spread. Across fires and through valleys, warriors began telling the tale of a man who had erased himself so thoroughly even the snow forgot him. Some said he was part spirit. Others said he had learned to speak the language of trees and used their shadows to hide. A few claimed he could walk inside the breath of animals and see what they saw. But all agreed on one thing: he was never found. Not because he fled, because he had changed shape. One enemy elder, when asked what the mission had taught them, replied with a grunt, "You can burn a village. You can track a man, but you cannot hunt something that's listening to the mountain more closely than to his own fear." And after that, no war party ever returned to that ridge again. Not because they feared death, because they feared nothing. Ghost elk never called it an invention. That was the word the others used, after the war trails went quiet and the scouts stopped returning. They spoke of him with wide eyes and hushed tones, saying he had built a tool that turned wind into walls and silence into shields. But ghost elk, sitting beneath the same old rise, stirring ash into water and listening to how the fire cracked in different winds, would only shake his head. "It wasn't a trick," he said once to a passing hunter who dared to linger near him. "It was remembering, that's all. I remembered how the earth listens." Years passed. The old camp never rebuilt in that spot, not out of fear, but reverence. The rise where his shelter had once been was left undisturbed, except for a single carved stone placed near its edge. It bore no name, just a groove in the shape of a wind spiral and a single handprint beside it. Travelers came and went, some searching for wisdom, others for stories. But none found ghost elk again. Some said he had walked into the cliffs and became part of the stone. Others claimed he lived beneath the ice, emerging only to whisper warnings to those who listened poorly. But the lesson remained, not in the stones, but in the children. Years later, when the next generation of hunters were taught how to build shelters, how to walk without leaving footprints, how to breathe with the rhythm of the land instead of over it, they were told stories. Not of warriors who fought, but of one who disappeared on purpose. They practiced walking backward through snow, just as he had. They learned how to stack stones so wind would slide over them like water. They were taught to watch the firelight flicker across hides and ask, "Is that a light or a lure?" The questions became sacred, the silences became respected. Elders began referring to his way not as vanishing, but as alignment, not hiding from nature, but blending with it so fully that the land itself chose not to speak your name. In council, it was said that Ghost Elk had reminded the people of something older than war, that survival was not always strength. Sometimes it was stillness. Sometimes it was humility. Sometimes it was knowing that the most powerful campfire is the one your enemies never see. And so, in time, Ghost Elk's legacy was not a bow, or a weapon, or even a lodge. It was a teaching. One that children whispered to each other when they snuck away to play near the river's bend. One that scouts recited under their breath when tracking in foreign lands. One that elders passed on in twilight when all other stories had been told. "He made the camp disappear," they would say. And someone would always ask, "With what?" And the answer was always the same, "With nothing but awareness." Because in a world shaped by wind, shadow, and silence, the one who listens deepest lives longest.